Part 1. The fragility of motivation. If you rely on motivation, you've already lost. That sounds extreme. It isn't. Motivation feels powerful. It's intense. It's emotional. It creates momentum. It convinces you that change is happening. But motivation is a state, and states fluctuate. You don't wake up the same person every day. Some days you feel driven. Other days you feel tired, distracted, uncertain, flat. If your action depends on how you feel, your progress depends on instability. That's not strength, that's volatility. Motivation is emotional, and emotions are reactive. They respond to environment, to sleep, to stress, to validation, to novelty, which means motivation is unreliable by design. It spikes when something is new, it fades when something becomes repetitive, and everything meaningful becomes repetitive. Skill requires repetition. Mastery requires repetition. Character requires repetition. Motivation loves beginnings. It hates maintenance. That's why people start easily and stop quietly. They mistake initial intensity for commitment. But intensity is not structure, and without structure, intensity collapses. Here's the deeper issue. When you depend on motivation, you are dependent on mood. Mood-based living creates inconsistency. Inconsistency creates doubt. Doubt erodes self-trust, and self-trust is the foundation of autonomy. So the question is not whether motivation is useful. It is. The question is whether it is sufficient. It isn't. Because motivation asks, do I feel like it? Discipline asks, what is required? And that difference changes everything. In the next part, we'll define what discipline actually is and why it has nothing to do with aggression or intensity. Part 2. Discipline is structural, not emotional. Most people misunderstand discipline. They imagine rigidity, harshness, self-denial, relentless pressure. That's not discipline, that's force. Discipline is structural. It is the decision to remove negotiation from certain areas of your life. When something is structural, it does not depend on emotion. It is embedded. Brushing your teeth is structural. You don't debate it. You don't wait to feel inspired. You do it because it's integrated into your identity. That's discipline at its most basic level. Philosophically, discipline is pre-commitment. It is the act of deciding in advance how you will behave, so that your future self doesn't have to argue with itself. When you rely on motivation, you decide repeatedly. When you rely on discipline, you decide once. That reduces friction. Friction consumes energy. Energy spent on internal negotiation is energy not spent on execution. This is why disciplined people appear calm, not because they feel more motivated, but because fewer internal arguments occur. They are not fighting themselves daily. They structured their behavior beforehand. Now here's the paradox. Discipline is not about restricting freedom. It is about protecting it. Without structure, impulses dominate, and impulse-driven living is reactive. Reactive living feels free in the moment, but chaotic over time. Freedom without structure becomes drift. Structure without awareness becomes prison. Discipline is the balance. It sets boundaries voluntarily, and voluntary constraint is power. Because when you choose your limits, you are not limited by accident. You are directed by intention. This is why discipline outperforms motivation long-term. Motivation pushes. Discipline sustains. Motivation is spark. Discipline is architecture, and architecture determines durability. In the final part, we'll go deeper into why freedom is actually created through limitation. Part 3. Freedom through constraint. The idea that discipline creates freedom sounds contradictory, but it's structurally true. Consider this. A musician becomes free through scales. A writer becomes free through language structure. A fighter becomes free through technique. A thinker becomes free through logical discipline. Constraint creates range, because mastery removes hesitation. When behavior is structured, mental bandwidth increases. You're not deciding whether to act, you're acting, and that creates continuity. Continuity builds competence, competence builds confidence, confidence builds autonomy. Now contrast that with motivation-based living. You act when inspired, you stop when tired, you restart when guilty, you collapse when overwhelmed. This creates fragmentation. Fragmentation weakens identity. You begin to doubt your own consistency, and self-doubt is a form of internal instability. Discipline eliminates that instability, not by eliminating emotion, but by refusing to let emotion dictate direction. Here is the deeper philosophical layer. Freedom is not the absence of constraint. It is the alignment between chosen constraint and meaningful aim. If you choose no structure, you are constrained by impulse. If you choose deliberate structure, you are constrained by purpose. One is random, one is intentional. Only one leads to autonomy. And here is the final distinction. Motivation feels good. Discipline feels neutral. Motivation is exciting. Discipline is quiet. Motivation is visible. Discipline is invisible. But invisible systems create visible results. The person who relies on motivation is strong when conditions are favorable. The person who relies on discipline is stable regardless of conditions. And stability beats intensity, always. So remember, motivation is emotional. Discipline is structural. Emotion fluctuates. Structure endures. And freedom does not come from doing whatever you feel like. It comes from becoming someone who does what is required whether you feel like it or not. That is not harshness, it is maturity. If this challenged how you define freedom, sit with it. Discomfort often marks growth. If you want more content like this, philosophical, precise, and focused on real autonomy, you can follow this channel. New videos will continue exploring structure, strength, and inner mastery. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.